Good afternoon. Welcome to our Mulberry Talent Partners Leadership Conversation. I'm going to give attendees just a little bit of time to begin logging on. Okay, it looks like people are beginning to join us. So my name is Laura Back. I'm the Director of Marketing and Events for Mulberry Talent Partners. Welcome today to our Mulberry Talent Partners Leadership Conversation. If you're new to Mulberry, welcome. We're so glad to have you here today. Just a little bit about us. We are a full service staffing and recruiting agency headquartered in Portland, Oregon, with an office also in Silicon Valley in California. We specialize in the professional placement of human resources, professional and financial office, payroll and operations positions for direct hire, temp to hire, and temporary positions. I'd encourage you to check us out online at mulberrytalent.com, where you can browse through a selection of our active candidate pool, launch a new requisition or search, and learn more about our service offerings. Today, we are joined by Lauren Francis, who is our fabulous founder and president. Lauren founded Mulberry Talent Partners in June of 2017, bringing over 25 years of talent acquisition and entrepreneurial experience. And today, we are so pleased to welcome Isaac Dixon, who brings over 30 years as a senior HR leader. So welcome, Isaac. Lauren and Isaac are going to be discussing the importance of DEI initiatives in the workplace. So that'll include what to do at the onset of your DEI journey, the importance of buy-in by senior leadership, how to align your organization's mission, vision, and values with your initiatives, how to design measures that can track and measure outcomes and success, and understanding your company culture and how to accept that human bias exists. We're also so pleased to announce that we're going to be doing a giveaway thanks to Isaac. So one lucky attendee will win a 1-hour consulting session with Isaac, and we'll announce the winner later on this week when we email all attendees with a recording of this webinar as well. Just before I go on ahead and pass it over to Isaac and Lauren, we will save some time at the end for questions. So please feel free to submit questions as they come up, and we'll do our best to answer any and all that come up. So without further ado, I'll go on ahead and pass it over to Lauren and Isaac.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're so happy to have you here today. Happy New Year. And Isaac, we're so pleased to have you on the webinar today. This is, I shared this with Isaac when we first logged on earlier, that this is the largest audience that we have had since we started leadership conversations back in the fall. And so we're very, very pleased to hear that we have so many people joining us today. So welcome to all the attendees. And Isaac, you and I have been, have known each other and known of each other for many years, and just we're very, very pleased to have you on today. So without any more delay here, let's get started. We wanted to jump into the conversation, and what to do. Really, what we're trying to set up here is what to do at the outset of your organizational DEI journey. And one of the main, when you and I were talking about this webinar and putting it together, one of the things that we talked about was, maybe just the setup for it. And one of the things you mentioned very clearly was the getting support from senior leadership was critical to the process. Could you talk a little bit about that with our audience today?
Sure. First of all, my sincere thanks to you for having me on, and your team for all the support and help. Getting the support for senior leadership in every organization, regardless of size and type, is critical to the success of not only diversity, equity, inclusion, but most HR-related initiatives. And DEI in particular, because oftentimes senior leaders may have individually different ideas about what diversity, equity, inclusion means, what the work involves, and what the journey looks like. And so I would strongly advise folks who have DEI responsibility to spend time talking to each member of the senior leadership team individually. Remember, we have to take people where they are, not where we wish they would be. So understanding where they are individually can help you as you begin to craft the path that your diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative is going to take.
Yeah. you made that very clear because you've seen that you could have all the pieces in place, and if that critical piece is not in place, it's very difficult to have success.
Yeah, or you'll encounter resistance later on and not understand why.
Right, right. So in terms of what one point that you made was to be careful of diving off into the deep end of the pool. So help us understand what you're saying there.
Well, that's why that conversation with senior leadership is important, but also to being really dialed into your organizational culture. Is it, and there's not a good thing or a bad thing about it. It's kind of an understanding of who we are as human beings in an organization. Are we a change-averse organization? Are we highly cautious? Are we risk averse? I mean, knowing those things about your culture can really help you craft the scope, the depth, the pace at which things are going to move. If you try to move too fast in a risk-averse organization, you end up running the boat onto the rocks.
Mm-hmm.
And many times that can be difficult to recover from. So understanding your organization and its culture, and having open, honest dialogue with people where they know you're going to really listen to their input is critical.
Have you seen situations where people kind of decide they're going to, organizations decide they're going to do this, and then they don't really know what's involved in creating a successful initiative?
Yes, indeed. And unfortunately, I'm seeing more of that than less of it.
Mm.
I've seen organizational leaders walk into the HR director's office one bright sunny day and say, "Oh, and by the way, DEI now falls under you. Good luck."
Mm.
And no discussion about additional resources, knowledge, skills, and abilities that the person needs to have in order to be able to do that work.
Mm-hmm.
And no plan for development of that HR practitioner who now has DEI, no professional development plan.
Mm.
So, any person would feel ambushed, and a lot of times that's kind of what happens. I call it DEI by drive-by. And if you want to make a diversity, equity, inclusion initiative unsuccessful, that's a really great way to do it.
And I think too that the why, if that's something important to the leader, well, let's say to bring that into the organization, then what's the motivation? Is it
Exactly.
Is it popular? It's not like, I sometimes refer to it as, we're an equal opportunity employer, we're DEI, focused, or what I mean? Is it checking off the box? What,
Or it becomes more of a slogan than just about anything else.
Right.
And I think you're absolutely right. And I've seen organizations attempt to do it that way. And I've seen organizations do a hospitality group I was with this morning. They've taken a much more thoughtful approach. The founders of the company talked with me first, and then they had me meet with their senior leadership team. And then the great thing is, I was on a call this morning with all of their associates from the entire company. And they got to pitch questions and ideas, and so that's the kind of culture that's transparent, it's open, and they're willing to change. They also understand that a one size fits all DEI process and strategy just doesn't make sense for them. It doesn't fit their culture. And they've been very open in sharing with me what their culture, what their mission, what their vision, and their values are. And that certainly makes the work that I do in helping to support their initiative and much easier to do.
Well, that was the next point, was aligning, was making that point that aligning the company's mission, vision, and values with this strategy.
Yeah, one of the things that they had talked about was they have difficulty recruiting from different ethnic groups because of where they're located. And I asked them to take a step back and said, what things do you do well in terms of community outreach? And they talked about the great care and support that they give to local food banks. And I said, oh, okay. When you have people, volunteering at those food banks, do they ever talk to people about jobs that you might have that are open, or what career opportunities look like with your organization? Gee, no, I hadn't thought about that. I said, it's always a recruiting opportunity. Turn all of those volunteers into recruiters. Also, too, communities that you don't have a real strong bridge with, find community-based organizations that may host fundraisers or other things throughout the year. Send your key people to those fundraisers and make sure that they never leave without cards, introductions, and they get to know people. Many of these communities, word of mouth is much stronger than a website. So if somebody says, I heard that Mulberry Talent's really a great place to work, and I talked to this woman named Lauren, and here's her card. Why don't you give her a call? They're interested in hiring people from diverse backgrounds. Maybe they might have a position for you.
Right.
That will carry so much weight. And if people come in to meet and they're treated well and they walk away feeling respected and heard, that news travels really fast.
Yeah, open that door for people, because I think people do have a lot of, this is what we deal with all the time. The idea of networking and building relationships and connections is not easy for everyone.
No.
And we have to use our connections and our hearts and our community to help people, in every way we can.
Yes, and you like I have attended events hosted by Partners in Diversity, and you see the turnout. 300-400 people back in the days pre-COVID, when we used to be able to get together. But there were so many people, and I have talked to people that have gone to those events that have remembered those events years later, because of how welcome that they felt, and all the people that they had the opportunity to meet. So investing our time in building relationships with community-based organizations, particularly those that our organizations may be donating to or supporting foundations for, those are great ways to build your inroads to communities that may not be well represented in your workforce.
So one of the other topics that you and I discussed was the measures that companies need to take to help DEI, explain the progress that you're making, the measurable progress. Can you speak to that?
Sure. We live in an era of data, and HR people in particular are becoming more data focused, not less. So sitting, and even if DEI doesn't reside in your world, maybe you have a separate office and a vice president that runs that office. But sitting down and having a conversation about where things are headed, what kinds of issues and concerns are important, and how will you know that what success looks like if you don't track the data? And so certainly there's what I call sort of top of the water things, like recruitment and selection data. How do our applicant pools look? Who are we hiring versus number of people that apply? There's some of that stuff that certainly ought to be part of the discussion, and you really should track. But then there's things, how do we solicit for companies to contract with us?
Mm.
What's that process like?
Mm.
And how many of them are women or minority-owned businesses? Do we know? Do we even ask?
Right.
So those are things that we could start tracking in a dashboard. And over the course of time, we have a real great snapshot about where we were, where we're going, and what does the gap look like in between. And we can then have intelligent discussions about how do we close the gap? What resources do we put at the disposal of those who are doing the work to help them become more aware of what they're doing, but also make changes. And we can track over time the changes that we make. This is the thing that I've heard from several organizations that I've talked to about DEI. They said there was no measures for them about what was successful and what wasn't. And so if things are floundering a bit and you're measuring things, you can see where you might be stuck and you can see why you're stuck. Without data, it's pretty hard to tell.
Yeah, and how you can get unstuck, right?
Exactly.
Well, true. And I think too that the communicating with employees, I hear a lot that, we have a DEI initiative, but I don't know what's going on. I think that as an employee, you sort of, you've got the HR department, kind of doing their work, but to be a voice to that work, to the employees, to the community of workers, it is so important. And I think that gets lost often, that we're on this mission, but nobody knows what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're in a vacuum. Right.
Exactly. And, one of the things that is becoming more and more important for organizations, public, private, large, small, is this whole concept around workforce planning. Post-COVID, the days of stacking 60, 70 people back in an office, I just don't think that's going to happen anymore. So if you don't have a clear picture of what talent is on your bench, who's ready to move up, or who's ready to move on, you can end up being surprised as the economy starts to unthaw by people jumping ship. And I think that being able to track this data and have these conversations is a great way to see where you might have opportunities to move people along by having conversations with them about some kind of a performance, I call it performance management plan. Where do you want to go? And having that conversation with employees, at least annually.
Right.
As we get more and more workers into the workforce that have different expectations about what work means and what career means, we're going to have to manage people differently.
Right.
And measuring this data is a good way to give voice to that.
And and then of course you add in the remote piece, and that creates another challenge. And how do you work with that? So, okay. And then you mentioned, know your culture. And can you share more about that?
Yeah, my grandmother told me something I've never forgotten, and that is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And oftentimes we go with great passion and fervor to launch some initiative, and our culture tells us through people's actions, sometimes not their words, I'll get back to you. You're really excited about that, but that's like a 4 or 5 on my priority list. Understand who your organization is, what it is, what people value, what's important to them, and take the time to talk to people individually and understand how they see what it is you're doing or attempting to do. Are they willing to support it or not? And if they're not willing to support it, what information do they need in order to help them move? Because all of us have biases. all of us have concerns. Lots of this back and forth in organization is about resource allocation. And so sometimes people are scared by that. So having conversations with senior executives, mid-level managers, frontline managers is absolutely critical. And also too, especially around DEI work, the voice of employees has to be heard. And so building a process where you can get people involved, where they feel like it's a safe space for them to be able to talk, is critical. And remember that everybody, this work is individual and highly personal as well as organizational. And so I always try to make people feel comfortable and understand too that being uncomfortable is part of being part of the change and moving forward. But I don't want to try to fix people. I've had many people describe to me what sounds a lot like an unlicensed therapy session that they attended before, and I don't do that. I try to listen to who they are, where they are, and then let's talk about how do we move forward from there. What do you need to help you?
Sure. And you mentioned, you know, you're speaking about this to some degree, the unconscious, the biases that are part of the human condition, which are there, and you have to bring it out in the open.
Yeah.
People hide from that, and they're not vulnerable, or I mean, not vulnerable, transparent, I guess, about that reality.
Yeah, and if you don't acknowledge that, you'll encounter it somewhere down the road. So it is best to, you know, I like to open my work with a discussion about individual bias, and then give people some resources to read, some films to watch that are short films, and then invite them back to have a discussion about what did they think, see, hear, and feel when they were going through this. And I've in a couple of groups I've worked with, I've had people tell me really eye-opening. I was unaware that I was saying, doing, thinking those things, or why.
Right.
And that's where change starts. It's at an individual level.
Absolutely, one by one. You know, one of the things I was going to ask you is that, do you have advice for smaller organizations that may not have the resources, let's say, to hire not a consultant like yourself? I mean, your consultancy is one piece of it. Just internally, just to support the DEI, you know, process and structure. You know, I know that we started off talking about, you know, coming into the HR department and saying, okay, DEI is now something you guys are going to work on, and, you know, let's go at it, kind of thing. And I see that a lot. And so what happens is they're not set up for success. We talked about that. I think sometimes small organizations just don't feel like they have the resources to, let's say, hire someone. Let's imagine they have a talent acquisition department and they have one person, and they're asking, they're putting that same work on that one person, which sounds okay, but it may not, based on the size of the organization, it may not be helpful to initiate a DEI initiative or structure. So, you know, how can, I mean, big and small, large organizations, small organizations, I just hear that sometimes small organizations struggle to find the footing, I guess.
Well, I think that I think for me, it starts with asking questions and getting around a table, a virtual table nowadays, but a table nonetheless. Where are we? Where do we want to go? Why? How does this comport or align with our mission, vision, and values? And then oftentimes the most difficult question, who's going to be responsible for this in terms of not only the workload, but the perseverance that's going to be necessary for this to sustain itself.
Mhm.
You know, I think that you can get an executive team, or you can get the HR person and the owner, CEO of the company, and a couple of senior leaders, and that could be an all-day discussion of just those questions. But
Right.
you know, better to have those discussions in the outset
Mhm.
and find yourself muddling along some dark and dreary road and not understanding why you're not going anywhere. I think that I think too often we kind of launch these sorts of things and we hope or believe that others are with us,
Mhm.
and they may not necessarily have the same vision that you do.
Sure.
So I think having those discussions up front, as many of them as you need to have to gain clarity and to hone in what your destination looks like, makes a lot more sense than launching floundering. That's terribly frustrating to the organization. In some cases, I've seen it do irreparable damage to people's careers.
Mhm.
Um, when more questions at the front end and then listening to people's input and feedback is critical. Remember, the conversation with stakeholders is everything.
Mhm.
They're the people who are they're gonna be the boots on the ground in terms of making this all come to life. So the more they feel involved and the more they feel heard, the better your chances are.
Mhm. Make the investment. Yeah.
Yes.
So Laura, it looks like we have a question. I hope we have time. We do have a few minutes for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this came in from Jeff. As a job seeker, what is your advice for evaluating an organization's true thirst for creating a workplace with diverse backgrounds, experiences, and opinions?
Well, I will fall back on another old adage here.
Mm.
Believe none of what you see and some of what you hear. Look at what they do. Look at what the organization does, and don't be afraid to talk with community-based resources about their experience in dealing with this organization or company.
Mhm.
You'll get some really interesting feedback, and a lot of it really good. There's terrific companies that do a smashing job at having open and inclusive workplaces. Um, so I would say don't hesitate to do your homework and ask around.
Great. And we just had another question come in that I think we have time for from Wendy. Are there any suggestions for short videos on the topic of unconscious bias?
Great question.
Wow. Well, I do know that one of my favorites is, and I think there's a video, but it's a book called Blind Spots.
Oh.
And the authors Banajai and Greenwald, I believe there's been a film made of this book, but it's a terrific book. I've used this with a couple of different leadership teams and they loved it. It's written in plain English. It's got common sense stuff in it, and they really enjoyed it. And then Robin D'Angelo, of course, wrote a book on white fragility.
Right.
The title scares many people off, but the book is actually a really good one. And there has been a film version of that made as well.
Mhm. Right. Two great suggestions.
Great.
And
Well,
then those of us who live here in Portland, if you go onto the PSU website, one of my colleagues there, professor there, did a video, and I'll send you the link to it, Lauren and Laura. She did a video on the history of Black people in Oregon, and it's an eye opener. I sent it to one of the executive teams I was working with, and they had no clue. They had no clue. They were like, oh, no wonder African Americans are only 2% of the population. There was a law here that you couldn't own property if you were Black until 1968, I believe, before it was finally erased from the state constitution. So And one of the most active chapters of the Ku Klux Klan west of the Mississippi was in Oregon.
Wow.
Quite the past.
I look
Yeah, but
to receiving that link, Isaac.
Yeah, so we'll link those two books, and then we'll also get that link from Isaac and share that as well so that all attendees can see it. Just in closing, it looks like we are out of time. That always goes by very quickly. So here are our upcoming conversations. In February, we're going to be welcoming the founder of the Confidence Project, Tracy Hooper, to talk about her new book, The New Hello, which is what to say, what to do in this new world of work. And then in March, we're going to be welcoming Henry DeSaio. Henry was the COO of the 2008 Obama campaign, and he's going to be speaking with Lauren about the Changemaker effect. And then this is just how to stay in touch with Mulberry Talent Partners and with Isaac. We'd encourage you to connect to us and to Isaac on LinkedIn so that we can all stay in touch, and check out Isaac's newest venture, VistaHRconsulting.com, to learn more about his service offerings as well. So in closing, thank you for choosing to fly with Mulberry. We know you have a lot of options when it comes to webinars, and we really are so happy to have had you here.
Wishing everyone a great week. Thanks so much for joining us today. And
Thank you, Lauren and Isaac.
thank you.
Bye, everyone.